fasting, the spiritual side, interview with Darius J. Wright. He mentions this idea of raising one's frequency, doesn't he?
He views fasting as a practice that can help to sort of align the body and mind. It makes you more receptive, maybe clears out some noise so you can connect more easily with your soul or higher self.
Okay. You know that feeling after a big meal, maybe a bit sluggish, maybe even a little guilty sometimes.
Yeah, definitely know that one.
Well, what if I told you that flipping that switch, intentionally choosing not, could actually unlock some really surprising benefits for your body and maybe even, well, your mind too. Stick with us on this because I think by the end of this deep dive, you might see fasting in a completely new light. It's maybe far more profound than just like the latest diet trend.
Absolutely. So today, we're really taking a journey, aren't we, into the whole world of fasting, exploring its many, many facets.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at what the science tells us about how it affects our bodies physiologically.
Right.
We're also going to hear directly from people who've, actually tried it, experimented with it.
The real world stuff.
Exactly. And then we'll even touch on some, frankly, fascinating perspectives connecting it to our sort of spiritual potential.
Exactly. We've really immersed ourselves this time. We've got scientific articles from PubMed Central.
Yep, the heavy hitters.
We've got personal stories from Reddit, which, let me tell you, can be pretty eye-opening sometimes.
Oh, I bet.
And then some really, really thought-provoking insights from an interview that gets into stuff like out-of-body experiences and these broader ideas about human potential.
Wow. Okay. Quite a mix.
It is. So our mission here is to basically distill the most compelling bits from all these different sources. We want to give you a clear sense of how fasting might impact your physical and your spiritual well-being, but without, getting totally bogged down in overly technical jargon.
Makes sense. Keep it accessible, but deep. So where do we even start with such a big topic?
Good question.
Well, I think it's maybe worth remembering first off that fasting, it's not some new invention, right?
Not at all.
I mean, throughout history, as one of our sources mentioned, people have fasted for spiritual reasons, for religious reasons.
Right, for millennia.
Exactly. This long tradition really suggests that, choosing to abstain from food has been linked to something more than just physical health for a very, very long time.
That's a really good point. It sets the stage. It's been part of so many cultures, so many faiths. But okay, let's pivot now to what modern science is actually telling us. What happens inside the body when we fast? This is where it gets biologically fascinating.
Okay.
Our research from PubMed Central gives us a pretty detailed picture of these physiological shifts.
It really does. So in that initial phase of fasting, you often see quite rapid weight loss. We're talking maybe around 0.9 kilograms. That's almost 2 pounds per day in the first week.
Wow, that sounds like a lot.
It does. But what's really interesting is that a big chunk of that initial drop isn't actually fat. It's mostly due to what's called a negative sodium balance.
Okay, explain that a bit.
Think of it like your body shedding excess water along with sodium. So yeah, the scale might move quickly at first, which can be motivating, I guess. But it's important for you to keep in mind that it's not all pure fat loss right at the beginning.
Okay, that makes sense. Good to manage expectations. So what happens then as the fast goes on beyond that first week or so? Does it keep dropping that fast?
No, it tends to slow down. By about the third week, the rate of weight loss is usually closer to maybe 0.3 kilograms per day.
Still something, but definitely slower.
Definitely. And underneath that, metabolically, your body is going through this really significant transformation. In the early stages, it starts making its own glucose, its main fuel, through a process called gluconeogenesis.
Gluconeogenesis, making new glucose.
Exactly. And it primarily makes it from other sources, like amino acids, which come from protein.
Okay, so the body's breaking down protein to get sugar for energy. Does that mean you're losing muscle?
Well, that's definitely a concern, and it does use some. However, as the fast continues, a really remarkable adaptation kicks in. The body gets much better at breaking down and using fat for energy.
Ketosis.
That's the one. You enter a state of ketosis. As ketone levels rise in your blood, they actually start replacing glucose as the main fuel source, especially for the brain. It's kind of like your body switching over from its regular fuel tank, glucose, to a big reserve tank filled with fat.
That's a neat analogy. So we hear so much about keto and ketosis now. By switching to burning fat and making these ketones, the body doesn't need to break down as much protein then.
Precisely. That's the key benefit. Using ketones reduces the demand for that gluconeogenesis from amino acids. So it helps to preserve your precious muscle tissue, which is obviously crucial for surviving longer periods without food. It's a protein-sparing mechanism.
That's actually a pretty clever system the body has.
It really is. Survival adaptation.
Are there other big physiological changes the science pointed out? Hormones, maybe?
Oh yeah, definitely hormonal shifts too. Levels of insulin tend to fall quite a bit, which makes sense, right? No incoming sugar.
You're right.
And T3, which is an active thyroid hormone, that also tends to drop. Meanwhile, other hormones like glucagon, which kind of does the opposite of insulin, and something called reverse T3, their levels tend to rise.
Okay, so a whole hormonal cascade adjusting to the fasting state.
Exactly. These shifts are really driving a lot of the metabolic adjustments we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's also really important to remember something here.
What's that?
Most of the scientific studies on longer fasts, the ones we draw a lot of this data from, they were done on individuals with obesity.
Ah, okay.
So the results might not be exactly the same for someone who is already quite lean.
Huh.
Bodies with more fat stores might react differently than those without.
That's a really crucial caveat. Good point. What about downsides? Did the research mention any, medical risks or complications?
Yes, it did. It's not without potential risks, especially longer fasts. The research mentions possibilities like gout, which is related to uric acid buildup,
Okay.
and also urate nephrolithiasis, basically certain types of kidney stones.
Oof.
Also postural hypotension, that's feeling dizzy or faint when you stand up because your blood pressure drops.
I've heard of that one.
And in some cases, even cardiac arrhythmias, irregular heartbeats. So it's really, really important for anyone listening to be aware of these and definitely talk to a doctor before trying any serious fasting.
Absolutely. Safety first, always. Okay, so that's the science bit, the physiological deep dive. Now, let's maybe step away from the lab and get into the real world, the personal experiences. Our Reddit source had some pretty raw accounts.
It certainly did. It gives you that ground level perspective. For instance, one person shared their story of finishing a 72-hour water fast.
3 days. Okay.
Yeah, 3 days. They said they lost 6 pounds, but they also mentioned it wasn't easy. Day 3 was apparently the hardest: headaches, dizziness, really strong hunger pangs.
Sounds about right for day 3 from what I've heard.
But alongside the challenges, they also felt this huge sense of accomplishment, and they were actually planning to try alternate day water fasting after that.
Wow, okay. So the challenge didn't put them off completely.
Not at all. It's interesting to hear both sides, the struggle and the sort of rewarding feeling.
Definitely. What else came up in those threads? Anything surprising?
Well, the whole discussion around something called refeeding syndrome was pretty interesting.
Right, I've had that term. It sounds serious.
It can be. One person warned about it, but another argued it's mostly a risk with severe, prolonged malnutrition, maybe less likely with shorter fasts like 72 hours.
Okay, bit of debate there.
Yeah, but then another commenter chimed in saying they did feel symptoms that seemed like a mild version of it after their own 72-hour fast.
So maybe it's still something to be really careful about, even with shorter fasts, like how you reintroduce food.
Exactly. It just underscores how important it is to be mindful when you start eating again. Go slow, choose foods carefully.
Yeah.
The Reddit thread even had some colorful advice about being gentle on your digestion, mentioning something about a potential moist fart.
Huh. Okay, leave it to Reddit for the practical, if slightly graphic, tips.
Yeah.
Always good for a reality check.
Indeed. Another thing people reported a lot during those 72-hour fasts was needing more bathroom trips. Yeah, and often described as, well, liquid-like bowel movements, which again points to why drinking plenty of water is so critical during a fast. Stay hydrated.
Good point. Hydration seems absolutely key, non-negotiable, really. Was there anything about, what kind of liquids are okay? Someone asked about bone broth, didn't they?
Yeah, that came up. Can you have bone broth on a water fast? And the general consensus, or at least the view from one experienced faster there, was no. Bone broth has fat and some protein.
Ah, so calories and macronutrients.
Exactly. So that would technically break a strict water fast. It highlights there are different kinds of fasts, right? Water fasting is one thing, a bone broth fast is another. Important distinction.
Makes sense. You need to know what rules you're playing by. Now, it wasn't just adults talking about their experiences, was it? There was a worrying discussion about a teenager fasting.
That's right. Someone asked about water fasting for a 14-year-old, and that raised some serious red flags for other users.
I can imagine.
Yeah, several people strongly advised against it, pointing out potential negative impacts on growth and development, which are obviously crucial at that age. Some even called it potentially dangerous.
Yeah, that sounds like wise caution. Fasting seems like something for adults who understand the risks and can make informed choices. Probably not for kids still growing. Consulting doctors is essential there.
Absolutely paramount, especially for younger people. But, going back to the original poster who did the 72-hour fast,
Yeah.
did they find a way to make it work long-term?
It seems like they did, eventually. They updated later saying that alternate day fasting didn't quite suit them,
Okay.
but they did manage to keep the weight off by incorporating 72-hour fasts, just not every single week. And later they shifted to doing daily 18-hour fasts combined with watching their overall calories.
So intermittent fasting, like a 186 schedule.
Yeah, exactly. Their takeaway was really about finding your own personal fasting ritual, something sustainable that works for you.
That feels like a really key insight from the personal stories.
Yeah.
It's not one size fits all. You have to experiment and find your rhythm.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered history, the science, the personal trials and tribulations. Now, let's shift gears completely. Let's explore this other very different angle on fasting, the spiritual side, particularly the ideas shared in that interview with Darius J. Wright. This is where things get pretty expansive.
Indeed. It takes the conversation in a whole new direction.
Yeah.
Darius talks about humanity being in this phase of revealing and remembering.
Revealing and remembering. What does that mean exactly?
He suggests we're moving towards a greater collective understanding of how interconnected we all are, and also remembering our own innate power and potential.
Okay.
So from this perspective, practices like fasting aren't just about the physical body anymore. They take on a much broader significance.
He mentions this idea of raising one's frequency, doesn't he? Connecting with things like unconditional love, integrity, authenticity. How does that fit in?
Right. He sees that cultivating those higher vibrational states, if you will, as the pathway to remembering who we truly are, our soul selves, and unlocking our inherent capacity for healing ourselves and potentially, well, reality around us.
Yeah.
It's a very different framework for well-being.
So raising frequency is like focusing on positive, high-integrity emotions and intentions.
That seems to be the essence of it, yeah. He suggests that figures we look back on as masters or awakened individuals could perform what looked like miracles because they were tapped into their soul's energy through these really high frequencies. He even makes an interesting parallel to the placebo effect.
Oh, so?
Well, how the power of pure belief, that strong intention, can actually influence and manifest changes in physical reality.
That's a really potent idea, our internal state, our beliefs having that kind of direct impact. So how does fasting specifically connect to this spiritual framework for Darius?
He views fasting as a practice that can help to sort of align the body and mind. It makes you more receptive, maybe clears out some noise so you can connect more easily with your soul or higher self.
Okay.
He mentions his own experience doing a 15-hour daily fast, similar to that 186 idea, and also doing a 3-day water fast, but using salt water.
Yeah.
He felt it was supportive, which is interesting because the salt links back to electrolytes, something we saw mentioned on Reddit,
Yeah.
just from a purely physical need perspective.
Yeah, that is interesting how those threads connect, even across completely different viewpoints. Body needs electrolytes, maybe the spirit benefits from that alignment too. Darius also talked about ancient knowledge being hidden, right? And had a really unusual take on baptism.
He did. He suggested that maybe the original understanding of baptism wasn't just symbolic, but was actually seen as a way to, like, reprogram the body.
Reprogram.
Using specially programmed water and even electromagnetic fields with the goal of helping to fully integrate the soul into the physical body. It's definitely unconventional.
Definitely outside the mainstream interpretation, for sure. The idea of water holding information is kind of fringe, but pops up in different places. What about accessing universal records? What was that about?
He puts forward this idea that there's almost like a cosmic database of all knowledge. The Akashic records is another term sometimes used.
Okay.
And that through certain practices, maybe fasting being one, and achieving certain states of consciousness, we can potentially tap into this universal information. He also really emphasizes that we are inherently powerful creators. Yeah, that our beliefs and intentions aren't just thoughts. They actively shape our reality. It circles back to that power of belief, that frequency idea.
And he connects those high frequencies like love, integrity, authenticity, not just to spiritual growth, but potentially to actual healing, repairing the soul, and maybe even the physical body.
That's the implication, yes. It's a very holistic view where the spiritual, emotional, and physical are deeply intertwined. If you raise your frequency, you heal on all levels. And he even briefly mentioned using affirmations, positive statements like, I am loving, I am all-knowing. Seeing those as a way to actively program your body through the power of your own words, reinforcing that mind-body connection.
It's certainly a lot to take in, this merging of, hard science about metabolic shifts and these much more esoteric spiritual ideas about frequency and potential, but it definitely paints a much bigger picture of what fasting could be about.
It really does. We've gone from ancient history and religious practice through the detailed physiological changes documented by science.
Ketones and hormones and all that.
Heard those really candid, sometimes tough personal experiences from people trying it out.
The Reddit stories,
And landed in this fascinating spiritual realm, exploring ideas about human potential and consciousness.
So, wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you listening right now? Hopefully what this deep dive has shown is that fasting, well, it's potentially about a lot more than just losing a few pounds. It has this rich history, it triggers really significant adaptive changes in your body's biology, it involves a whole spectrum of personal challenges and triumphs, and maybe, just maybe, it offers a pathway to aligning not just your physical health, but also connecting with a deeper sense of yourself.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question for you to think about, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Could intentionally using periods of fasting be a tool, not just for your physical well-being, but maybe also for tapping into deeper levels of self-awareness, perhaps even unlocking more of your innate human potential?
That is a thought-provoking question to end on, especially after exploring all these different angles today.
It really is something to consider.
Absolutely. We really encourage you to mull that over. And hey, if you found this deep dive interesting, if it sparks some thoughts for you, please do take a second to hit that like button and leave a comment.
Yeah, doing that really helps YouTube figure out what kind of stuff you enjoy so it can recommend more videos like this one to you.
Exactly. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives. And if you know someone else who might find this whole topic fascinating, please share this with them.
And right now, you should see 2 other deep dives appearing on your screen. Feel free to click on one of those to continue your journey of learning and exploring with us.